And good evening. You're watching Outsiders with James Morrow and with Rowan Dean. In the Australian newspaper tomorrow, we've flogged your newspaper, the Telly. We gave that a good plug, so we better give the Oz a quick plug as well.
Support some more quality journalism tonight, Rowan.
Great article here. Get Up faces a Conservative challenger. So a great about bloody time too. There's an article here that there's an organisation calling itself Advance Australia who are basically looking at challenging the whole notion of get up and fighting fire with fire. A conservative version. About time to get up to the same sort of activities, hopefully with all the right people behind it and the right people listening to it. We will have tomorrow on the show someone from Advance Australia who will be talking to us about it. Now, at this time every Monday, we go to Amanda Stoker, the Queensland Senator, great friend of this program. She's in Brisbane. Amanda, how are you?
Very well, thanks.
Good to see you. So you've left Canberra behind for back in Brizzy. So all good up there?
It's very nice to be home.
Fantastic. Now, what do you think? A new get-up, a Conservative get-up? Sound good?
It sounds really good. I think it would be a wonderful thing to have more sort of third-party participants in the public affairs arena, because at the moment we know that the people who are driving what the media are talking about most of the time and what politicians are talking about are those on the far left. It's nice to balance things up a bit.
Absolutely. Now, Amanda, I wanted to talk to you about Aussie John Simon. So, good old Aussie John from Aussie Homelands. I used to do ads with him, Amanda. I used to do these ads where he'd go, "Well, saviour."
Right.
I'd have to try and my brief was to get him to try and put a bit more personality into it. So I'd say, "You've got to say, 'will save you.'" And he'd go, "Well, saviour." So I'd say, try, "will save you." And he'd go, "Well, saviour." Anyway, that's what you'd like to know that.
Will save you.
Probably don't want to know it, but anyway, "Will save you." You'll save me, won't you?
I'll save you. I'll save you. I've saved you a few times.
You always do. Yeah. Amanda, what's negative gearing? So he's come out and he said that Labor's negative gearing policies are not only a hand grenade, but they're also a nuclear bomb.
Big difference between the two, by the way.
Well, there you go, Amanda. What
Not sure I want to be on the business end of either, but
nuclear hand grenade.
What do you reckon?
Look, they're different, hand grenades and atomic bombs, but they're both pretty awful if you're standing in front of one. So for the 1.3 million Australians who negative gear their investment properties, it means an awful lot. I mean, the whole purpose of this policy from Labor is to drive the price of houses down. But what that means is that people's biggest asset is suddenly worth less, their investment properties are suddenly worth less, even if they do have the benefit of grandfathering, and it means there's less investors in the property market, so rents go up. This is an absolute lose-lose policy. No Australian does well out of this, and all of the data we've seen shows that it really is something that affects middle Australia and working class Australia. It's not something that's only going to touch on the elite. It's an awfully big deal, and what John Simons has pointed out today is the whole cohort of unintended consequences, like rising unemployment, like threatening our AAA credit rating, like potentially tipping us towards recession because of all of these negative flow-on impacts. It shows that Labor hasn't got a clue when it comes to the economy, and that people have very good reason to be very, very scared about what their economic future looks like if they have the future of a shortened government.
Amanda, what are people saying around where you live and work and up in your electorate, up in Queensland? Are they concerned that Labor is going to be running a class warfare election that's just going to wind up with more of this sort of basically pitting the haves and the have-nots, or creating false categories of haves and have-nots against one another?
People are really disturbed by that because it's so un-Australian to try and pit one part of our community against another. It's just not how we do things. And this policy is a reflection of that desire to open up this class warfare. It depends upon the sort of politics of envy and this belief that it is a policy that's only used by rich people. But we know that it affects, middle and working class Australians. We also know that despite the fact that Labor brands it as being about levelling the playing field for people to get into property, that the only way it's levelling is by making everybody poor. That's not the kind of economic strategy we want for this country. People don't also realise that it will have negative effects on people who invest in the share market too. So you can expect this policy to have the effect of driving the price of shares down, driving all of the bank stocks down, and to continue this kind of credit crunch that combined is really bad for everyone.
Well, Amanda, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think anyone who votes Labor at the next election needs their head red, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. Now, free speech. We've seen a bit of a stoush within your own party, Amanda, with, you know, are we going to move the embassy? Are we not going to move the embassy? Oh, my God, Christopher Pyne's running around. Josh, you know, the media love all this stuff. The issue's pretty clear to me, but give me your thoughts on it. Thanks.
Look, when it comes to the embassy issue, I really like the idea of us putting our embassy in West Jerusalem. I think it's the right thing to do because the Middle East is a place that doesn't have an awful lot of countries that share our values, but Israel is one. And we should be doing all we can to help strengthen them. But if we go to sort of today's issue, that's a Malaysian PM saying that he's exercising his right of free speech to say some things that, you know, have a pattern of being uncomplimentary towards Jewish people. Look, I mean, it is his right to use free speech to say whatever he likes. Of course, that doesn't mean his free speech doesn't have consequences. I mean, that's true for all of us. I hope he will extend that right of free speech to all Malaysian people, because you do hear reports that free speech is not in broad supply.
Malaysia doesn't, from what I understand, is not exactly, you know, this sort of bastion of freewheeling, rollicking, outsiderish, if you will, free speech.
I did a job in Malaysia once, Amanda, and we were there for 3 weeks, and topic got round to politics at one stage, and I said to our production girl, by the way, tell me about Malaysian politics, who's the opposition? And she said, what's an opposition? Which kind of said it pretty much says a lot about Malaysia.
But ultimately, Australians shouldn't be taking direction on their foreign policy from any other nation. We shouldn't be crafting our foreign policy to pander to what we think terrorists are motivated by. Exactly. It's got to be what works for Australians and Australians' interests. But this issue of free speech is something, you know, that's important in Australia too. And you'll remember a couple of weeks ago we had a chat on this show about in Senate estimates I'd raised this concern that universities...
You've had a win there, Amanda, I gather.
Yeah, we've had a bit of a win. So after grilling a little bit about the fact that universities didn't seem to be complying with TEQSA, the Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Authority's requirements for intellectual freedom and freedom of speech, and they didn't seem to be complying with the funding agreements with the Commonwealth, the Education Minister, Dan Tehan, has now announced that former Chief Justice Robert French has been appointed to do an inquiry into whether universities are or aren't complying with his obligations and what that means. So hopefully that will mean there's a tightening up of funding.
Yeah, great work. Well done.
A big win, yeah, it's really exciting.
Now, Amanda, are you a member of the Tattersalls Club? I mean, have you been invited? You know, apparently no women are allowed in. This is Palaszczuk, Anastasia Palaszczuk has got very upset because big story in Queensland, she's boycotting her ministers from joining the Tattersalls Club. So have you ever been inside the Tattersalls Club? What's it like? Are females allowed in with their male partners? Tell us about the Tattersalls Club and why it's such a hot issue in Brisbane at the moment.
Look, I've been in the club. I'm not a member. At the moment, only men can be members, but I've been there plenty of times. You can go there as a guest or for functions and things like that, and it's a lovely club. I think it is extraordinary that the Premier is spending so much time talking about the internal machinations of a private club when, you know, we've got a drought that's ravaging this state, we've got hospitals that are in disarray, we've got, you know, all of these real things to deal with, and she wants to be running commentary on a private club. Quite frankly, if the members of the Tattersalls Club want to be a men-only club for membership, well, fine, that's a matter for them. I don't think it's necessarily a good thing for us to be telling people who are in a private club what they need to be doing. Sometimes it may be really important for a group of people to have a space where, you know, blokes can feel comfortable talking about bloke stuff, just like at the Moreton Club, which is women's only. There might be ladies talking about things that they feel more comfortable talking about in the company of women. I mean, this is a decision for members, and it sounds like it's being driven by the economic interests of the club and whether or not its members feel more comfortable being able to be in mixed company. And so, you know, let them do what they want to do.
Fantastic. Amanda, you're always a breath of common sense and a breath of fresh air. Now, speaking of common sense, and I was speaking of France earlier, and James and I, whenever we see each other on a Monday evening, we tend to shake hands. Occasionally, we'll give each other a peck on the cheek, you know, because we're those sort of, you know...
Generally doesn't get much friendlier than that.
Normally it's just a handshake, but Amanda, when I last saw you, I gave you a peck on the cheek. Or I think I did. Or did we shake hands? I don't know. But anyway, Alan Kohler in the, I think it was in the Oz, was it? Somewhere has written an article questioning whether we should get rid of the whole etiquette of the peck on the cheek. Now, as a woman who presumably, you know, in your job meets many, many men and many, many women, where do you stand on the peck on the cheek?
I really don't have a problem with the peck on the cheek. I mean, occasionally there's a little bit of awkwardness. It's not all the time, but now and then there is. But those little human interactions where, you know, you overcome that little bit of awkwardness are opportunities to build a rapport. They can help you to understand the people that you're meeting with. And those subtle social signals can really matter a lot in your dealings with people. So I don't think it's necessary for us to you know, remove all gender differences in the way that people interact. I mean, we can take this too far. There are differences between men and women and the way they interact, and that's okay. That's part of the richness of life, and I think we should roll with it.
But what about, you know, maybe we should have some specific rules. You know, in Europe, you always go straight for the peck, men or women. You know, here I think in Australia,
in fact, it's rude not to.
It's rude not to. In America, you know, where I'm from, it's generally just a handshake, but too often you're beset with the limp handshake, which is, I think, far worse than any awkward, sort of limp fish sort of thing. That's terrible. I reckon first meeting handshake, second meeting peck. That's my rule.
No. Now, Amanda, I wanted to...
My rule's much the same.
Good, excellent.
Good.
Now, I wanted to ask you about this another story up in Queensland at the moment, the Lady Cilento Childrens Hospital. Before that, I'll just mention that in WA, the births, deaths and marriages people are airbrushing the past to remove offensive language such as native, black, half-caste. These words have been redacted from birth certificates, death certificates and marriage certificates, including ones that are over 100 years old, and local genealogists and protesters saying this has the effect, basically, of airbrushing history. Where do you stand on that particular issue, Amanda?
Look, I tend to agree. I know it's language that, by modern standards, you know, we don't think it's very polite, but it does still tell us something really important about the time in which those documents were produced. Contemporaneous historical records matter because they tell us something about that time. This revisionism is really quite worrying.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, what I wanted to do with that is mention what's happening with the Lady Cilento Childrens Hospital, which is a kind of updated version of airbrushing history, where there's this current controversy in Queensland about the renaming of it, and the reason that the Labor government the left-wing government in Brisbane want to change the name is they accuse the late Phyllis Cilento, whom the hospital is named after, of being a racist or saying something or other homophobic or whatever it is. They've come up with some reason. So they changed the name, but the controversy is about whether they rigged the vote. Tell us about this, another Queensland controversy. I don't know how you all cope with all these controversies up in Queensland, Amanda.
Well, we have an incompetent state government. I mean, that just produces controversy. It's just how it happens. So the controversy today has been that a survey was run, presumably, you know, some charade of consultation, and the results showed an awful lot of responses have come from single IP addresses. And we're talking, you know, thousands and thousands of responses coming from single IP addresses. And that just looks a little bit sus. It calls the result of the poll into question. There's also been questions about the timing and a suggestion that the name was deregistered at a time prior to the completion of the consultation. So, you know, all the usual shenanigans you get from Labor in Queensland. But here's the more troubling thing. They're willing to spend over $500,000 changing the signage and running a faux consultation process to tear down the name of a woman who was an absolute pioneer in medicine for children and mothers in Queensland. You know, she really achieved amazing things for her time. It's being torn down in the way that you would expect someone who has been, thoroughly discredited as engaging in criminal conduct or corruption, and all she's done is, not been a darling of the left. It starts to smart of the kind of they're not my tribe, let's tear down the statues stuff that we've been seeing overseas, and it's a real problem. I would really like to see this government focus on properly resourcing the hospital so that we don't have kids getting their post-chemotherapy in the kitchen rather than in a hospital bed, rather than carrying on with this sort of nonsense. It's particularly interesting too, if you'll let me finish with this, they say it's necessary to change the name so that we can get international philanthropic funding. Now, it seems to me that it's an awfully odd thing that the Queensland Government can't run its hospitals to be sufficiently funded from the ordinary operating budget. We've got to go and beg from overseas philanthropy to pay for our hospitals. I think that'd be funding, remote frontier, developing world hospitals, not hospitals in the middle of Brisbane.
Absolutely. Amanda
seems a bit
Stoker,
fake.
as always, your middle name is common sense. Senator Amanda Stoker, thanks so much. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for having me.